On March 14th, 1889, in the village of Ashworth, Lancashire, England, a 12-year-old girl named Eleanor Hartwell was found dead at the base of St. Mary's Church steps, her body positioned in a fall that defied natural explanation. What made this tragedy transcend ordinary Victorian childhood mortality was the discovery made 3 days earlier, a drawing hidden beneath Eleanor's mattress, depicting her own death with impossible precision. Every detail matched exactly, from the position of her limbs to the weather conditions, from the dress she would wear to the shadows cast across the ancient stone. The evidence, preserved in parish records and coroner's files, documents something that should not exist. But before we dive into this nightmare, if you're new here and love spine-chilling stories, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to be notified when the next one drops. Now, let's begin. Eleanor Hartwell was born into circumstances of absolute ordinariness. Her father, William Hartwell, worked the looms at Ashworth Mill, his hands stained permanently with cotton dust and machine oil, while her mother, Catherine, took in sewing from the wealthier families whose homes overlooked the Irwell Valley. The family occupied a modest stone cottage on Mill Lane, its 2 rooms heated by a single fireplace, its windows facing the constant rhythm of the textile works that dominated the village economy. Eleanor attended St. Mary's Parish School with 47 other children of the working poor, where she demonstrated no particular academic distinction, no remarkable talents, no behavior that would draw the attention of her instructors or peers. She was, by every documented account, unremarkable. Her school teacher, Miss Margaret Pritchard, would later testify before the coroner's inquest that Eleanor had been a child of middling ability in all subjects, neither excelling nor failing, notable only for her quietness and tendency toward solitary play during recreation periods. There had been no history of mental illness in the family, no claims of supernatural experiences, no involvement with spiritualist societies or fortune-tellers that had become fashionable among certain circles in Victorian England. The Hartwells were Methodist, attended Sunday services with dutiful regularity, and maintained a household that parish records described as respectable and unremarkable. But in January of 1889, something changed. Eleanor, who had never demonstrated any artistic inclination beyond the crude sketches expected of children her age, suddenly began producing drawings of startling technical proficiency. Miss Pritchard noted in her school register that Eleanor's hand had become unnaturally steady, and her understanding of perspective and shadow beyond anything I have encountered in 30 years of instruction. The drawings appeared without instruction, without practice, without the gradual improvement that marks the development of skill. They simply emerged, fully formed, as if Eleanor's hand had been possessed by some external mastery. On the morning of March 11th, 1889, Catherine Hartwell entered her daughter's room to change the bedding and discovered, folded carefully beneath the horsehair mattress, a drawing that would alter her understanding of reality itself. The image, executed in graphite pencil on a sheet of cheap paper salvaged from her sewing scraps, depicted with photographic precision, a young girl lying at the base of stone steps, her body arranged in a position that suggested a fall from significant height. The girl wore a dress of specific design, a pattern Catherine immediately recognized because she was, at that very moment, in the process of sewing that exact garment from fabric purchased just days earlier. The drawing showed the dress completed, every button fastened, every fold of fabric rendered with meticulous accuracy. But what seized Catherine's breath was not merely the dress. The setting was unmistakable. The worn stone steps leading from St. Mary's churchyard down to the lower cemetery path. Steps Eleanor had been forbidden to use alone because of their dangerous pitch and crumbling edges. The girl's face, though turned partially away, bore Eleanor's features. Her left arm extended at an unnatural angle. Her hair had come loose from its ribbon. The stones around her showed evidence of recent rain, darkened with moisture, and in the background, rendered with impossible skill, the positioning of shadows suggested late afternoon, perhaps 3 o'clock. When Catherine confronted her daughter, Eleanor displayed no shame, no fear, only a disturbing calm that the mother would describe as already departed from this world. Eleanor's only statement, documented in Catherine's testimony, was this: "It's finished now, Mother. I've drawn it exactly as it will be." Terrified, Catherine carried the drawing directly to Reverend Thomas Blackwood, whose personal journal, now archived at the Lancashire Historical Society, records his immediate reaction. "I looked upon the paper and felt the presence of something beyond our mortal understanding. The child has seen through the veil of time itself, and what she has witnessed is her own ending." Reverend Thomas Blackwood spent the evening of March 11th examining Eleanor's drawing under lamplight in his study, and with each passing hour, his attempts at rational explanation crumbled beneath the weight of impossible specificity. The location depicted was unquestionably the northeast stairway descending from St. Mary's upper churchyard, a treacherous passage of 17 stone steps that the parish council had repeatedly discussed repairing but never funded adequately. Church records confirmed that Eleanor had never been permitted to use these steps unsupervised. Her Sunday school classes used the southern entrance exclusively, and Catherine Hartwell's testimony established that her daughter had been explicitly forbidden from approaching the cemetery stairs due to their dangerous condition. Yet the drawing showed not merely the general appearance of steps, but architectural details visible only from specific vantage points. The particular crack running diagonally across the 7th step, the iron railings missing baluster on the left side, the yew tree whose branches overhung the upper landing at a distinctive angle. The dress presented perhaps the most disturbing impossibility. Reverend Blackwood accompanied Catherine back to her cottage that evening to examine the garment still in construction. The fabric lay partially assembled on her work table, the bodice completed, but the skirt still pinned in sections, the collar not yet attached, several buttons missing from their card. Eleanor's drawing showed this exact dress in its finished state, and when Catherine held the drawing beside her pattern pieces, Every detail corresponded. The specific placement of decorative stitching she had planned but not yet executed. The particular style of sleeve she had adapted from a fashion plate. Even the number and positioning of buttons she intended to use. The weather conditions rendered in the drawing demonstrated knowledge beyond any child's capacity for prediction. The stones appeared darkened with moisture, not from heavy rain, but from the light passing shower that leaves surfaces damp without forming puddles. The cloud formations sketched in the background, which Blackwood initially dismissed as artistic liberty, showed the specific pattern of clearing weather, with darker clouds receding toward the eastern horizon. The body's position suggested a fall from exactly the height of the upper landing, the angles of limbs indicating impact points consistent with tumbling down 17 steps of that particular pitch and rise. The shadows, which Blackwood measured against his knowledge of the church's orientation and the seasonal position of the sun, indicated a time between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The expression on the drawn face, partially visible despite the turned position, showed neither fear nor surprise, but rather a quality that Blackwood described in his journal as peaceful resignation, as if the child had walked knowingly to meet this fate. These were not the random embellishments of childish imagination or the vague predictions of fortune-telling parlor tricks. These were specifications, precise and deliberate, documenting an event that had not yet occurred with the accuracy of a surveyor's map or a medical illustrator's diagram. The 3 days between March 11th and March 14th, 1889, were documented by multiple witnesses as a period of escalating dread and impossible strangeness. Catherine Hartwell confined her daughter to the cottage, refusing to permit her to leave even for school, a decision that Miss Pritchard noted in the attendance register with the annotation, "Family emergency, circumstances unusual." William Hartwell, summoned from the mill by his wife's frantic message, took leave from his shift for the first time in 7 years, a sacrifice that cost the family wages they could scarcely afford to lose. The parents established a rotation of constant supervision, one of them always present in Eleanor's room, watching her with the desperate vigilance of those attempting to prevent a prophecy they half believed and wholly feared. But Eleanor herself displayed no fear, no resistance to her confinement, only an increasing detachment from the physical world around her. She ate mechanically when food was placed before her, responded to questions in brief, distant phrases, and spent hours sitting motionless at the window, her gaze fixed on something beyond the view of the mill yards and workers' cottages. On March 12th, she told her mother, "It's already happened, you know. I've seen it done. Time is only confusing for those who haven't looked ahead." Catherine, in her testimony before the coroner's inquest, would describe her daughter's voice during these final days as no longer belonging to a child, but carrying the tone of someone ancient, someone who had witnessed too much. Reverend Blackwood visited daily, each time spending hours attempting to reach Eleanor through prayer, through conversation, through appeals to her reason and her faith. His journal entries from these days chart his transformation from skeptical rationalist to terrified believer. March 11th. Perhaps mere coincidence. March 12th. The child speaks of time as if she stands outside its normal flow. March 13th. I am in the presence of something beyond theological explanation. Something that suggests our understanding of God's creation is desperately incomplete. Catherine, in an act of desperate prevention, removed the unfinished dress from the cottage entirely, carrying it to her sister's home 3 streets away, as if eliminating the physical object might somehow prevent the prophecy's fulfillment. She watched Eleanor continuously, noting every movement, every glance, every word. The village, through the inevitable mechanism of whispered conversations and knowing looks, began to learn that something extraordinary and terrible was unfolding in the Hartwell cottage. On the afternoon of March 13th, Eleanor broke her silence with a request that stopped her mother's heart. "I should like to wear the dress tomorrow, Mother. The one you've been making. It should be ready now." Catherine's protests that the dress was unfinished, that it was no longer even in the house, met with Eleanor's calm response. "It will be finished. Everything is finished already. I've seen how it all completes." That night, William and Catherine made the decision to maintain absolute vigilance, both of them forsaking sleep to ensure their daughter could not leave the cottage, could not approach the church steps, could not fulfill the drawing's terrible prediction. They would prevent it through sheer force of parental will and watchful desperation. On March 14th, 1889, at approximately 2:47 in the afternoon, the impossible became documented fact. Despite William and Catherine Hartwell's sleepless vigilance, despite their determination to prevent what the drawing had foretold, Eleanor vanished from the cottage during a moment that would haunt her mother for the remainder of her life. At 2:43 p.m., a knock sounded at the door. Catherine, who had not left Eleanor's side for more than minutes at a time over 3 days, made a decision that would destroy her. She stepped into the front room to answer the door, a journey of perhaps 12 feet, a duration of perhaps 30 seconds. The visitor was Mrs. Pemberton from 2 doors down, bringing bread she'd baked that morning, an act of neighborly kindness prompted by whispered knowledge of the family's distress. Catherine accepted the bread, exchanged brief pleasantries lasting no more than 1 minute, and returned to find Eleanor's room empty, the window open to the March afternoon, the space where her daughter had sat, now holding only the impression of her weight in the chair's worn fabric. A neighbor child, 7-year-old Thomas Grimshaw, would later testify that he saw Eleanor walking up Mill Lane toward the church, her pace steady and purposeful, her expression serene, wearing a dress of blue calico with cream-colored collar that he had never seen before. Catherine's search was frantic and immediate, her screams bringing William running from the cottage yard, bringing neighbors to their doorways, her maternal instinct pulling her directly toward St. Mary's Church, despite the illogical nature of her fear. She reached the northeast stairway at 2:49 p.m., less than 6 minutes after discovering Eleanor's absence, and found what the drawing had promised. Eleanor lay at the base of the 17 stone steps, in a position of such exact correspondence to the drawing that witnesses would later struggle to articulate the horror of that precision. Her left arm extended at the angle rendered in graphite 3 days prior, her head turned to show the same partial profile, her legs arranged in the specific geometry of a body that had tumbled from the upper landing. She wore the completed dress, every button fastened, every seam finished. The garment that had been unfinished and hidden 3 streets away, now somehow clothing her daughter's body. The stones around her showed moisture from a brief rain shower that had passed through Ashworth between 2:30 and 2:45 p.m., though the morning had been dry. The cloud formations visible in the March sky matched those rendered in the drawing, darker masses receding toward the eastern horizon, creating the specific pattern of clearing weather. The shadows falling across the church wall and the yew tree corresponded exactly to the drawing's depiction of late afternoon light. Dr. Samuel Wickham, who arrived within 20 minutes of Catherine's discovery, documented in his initial examination notes dated March 14, 1889, that the body's positioning suggested not the chaotic arrangement of an accidental fall, but rather a placement of almost theatrical precision, as if the deceased had been arranged post-mortem by hands seeking to match some predetermined pattern. No one had witnessed the fall itself. No one had seen Eleanor ascend the steps, or lose her footing, or tumble down the worn stone. She had simply appeared at the base of the stairs, positioned exactly as she had drawn herself 3 days before death, claimed what she had already witnessed. The coroner's inquest into the death of Eleanor Hartwell convened on March 16, 1889, in the assembly room of Ashworth Town Hall, presided over by County Coroner James Rutherford, a man whose 23 years of experience investigating deaths throughout Lancashire had prepared him for every manner of tragedy, except the one now documented in the case file before him. Dr. Samuel Wickham testified first, presenting his post-mortem examination findings that detailed injuries consistent with a fall down stone steps, contusions to the skull, fractured left radius, severe trauma to the thoracic region. But his testimony included observations that troubled the medical man deeply. The injuries, while matching the mechanism of a fall, showed a distribution pattern that suggested the body had impacted the steps at mathematically precise intervals, as if each tumble had been choreographed rather than chaotic. More disturbing still, the time of death, established through body temperature and rigor mortis progression, could be fixed with unusual certainty to between 2:45 and 2:50 p.m. on March 14th. Yet several witnesses would testify to seeing Eleanor at various points that made the timeline of her journey from cottage to church steps impossibly compressed. The drawing itself was entered into evidence as Exhibit A, mounted on a board for the jury's examination. Coroner Rutherford ordered that a photographer be summoned to document the death scene, and these photographs placed beside Eleanor's drawing created a visual comparison that silenced the courtroom. Every element corresponded: the positioning of the body, the shadows, the wet stones, the dress, the crack in the seventh step visible in the background. Catherine Hartwell testified through tears about discovering the drawing on March 11th, 3 days before her daughter's death. Her account corroborated by Reverend Blackwood's journal entries and his own testimony. Henry Pemberton, a respected portrait artist from Manchester, commissioned by the court to analyze the drawing's technical execution, declared before the jury that the work demonstrated mastery of perspective, anatomical accuracy, and shading technique that I have encountered only in artists with decades of formal training. Certainly nothing within the capacity of a 12-year-old child of working-class background with no access to artistic instruction. The dress presented perhaps the most legally troubling impossibility. Catherine testified that the garment Eleanor wore at death had been unfinished on March 13th, had been removed from the household entirely and taken to her sister's home. Yet Eleanor's body was discovered wearing this same dress in its completed state, every seam finished, every button attached, work that would have required hours of skilled labor. Catherine's sister, Mary Brennan, testified that the dress had remained in her possession, untouched, until Catherine retrieved it after Eleanor's death, discovering it still unfinished. The logical conclusion that 2 identical dresses existed was eliminated by Catherine's testimony that the fabric was a remnant piece, insufficient for 2 garments, purchased from a specific lot at Ashworth Dry Goods, that the proprietor confirmed. Reverend Blackwood's testimony proved most controversial. His suggestion that Eleanor had experienced genuine supernatural foreknowledge, drawing objections from the jury foreman, who demanded the inquest remain focused on matters of physical fact rather than theological speculation. Yet even the skeptical jury members could not explain the documented timeline, the impossible accuracy of the drawing, the completion of the dress, the precision of every predicted detail. The Manchester Guardian sent a reporter whose dispatches brought the case to wider attention. His articles framing the death as either elaborate hoax or genuine proof of precognitive ability, depending on which expert he quoted. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, their struggle to reconcile physical evidence with rational explanation evident in their final verdict, delivered March 18th. Death by misadventure, circumstances inexplicable, no evidence of foul play, additional investigation into unexplained elements recommended, but unlikely to yield conclusive findings. On March 20th, 1889, 4 days after the inquest concluded its unsatisfying verdict, Miss Margaret Pritchard returned to St. Mary's Parish School to resume classes and made a discovery that would transform the Eleanor Hartwell case from tragic mystery into something far more disturbing. While clearing Eleanor's desk to prepare it for reassignment, she found, tucked beneath the wooden writing surface in a space where the joint had come loose, a collection of 7 additional drawings, each executed in the same impossibly skilled hand, each depicting scenes that Miss Pritchard recognized with growing horror. The first drawing showed the Grimshaw Farms hay barn engulfed in flames. smoke billowing in patterns that matched precisely the fire that had occurred on February 14th, 1889. The drawing was dated February 12th. The second depicted a woman in childbirth, the specific interior of a bedroom identifiable as belonging to Mrs. Margaret Blackwood, the vicar's sister-in-law, who had given birth to a son on January 23rd. Eleanor's drawing was dated January 18th, 5 days before the birth and 3 days before the pregnancy had been publicly announced. The third showed an elderly man collapsed in a chair, his face bearing the distinctive features of Thomas Ashworth, aged 73, who had died in his home on March 3rd from what Dr. Wickham had certified as heart failure. Eleanor had drawn his death on February 24th, 1 week prior. 4 more drawings documented events that had occurred between January and March. A horse breaking its leg on Mill Lane, a child falling through pond ice, a portion of the church roof collapsing during a windstorm, a woman discovering her husband in an act of infidelity. Each drawing was dated days or weeks before the event it depicted, and each showed the same meticulous accuracy that had characterized Eleanor's final self-portrait. Miss Pritchard brought these drawings immediately to Reverend Blackwood, who compared them against his own records of parish events and found that every detail corresponded to documented reality. The implications seized William and Catherine Hartwell with retroactive horror. Their daughter had been documenting the future for months, perhaps longer, and they had never noticed, never questioned the sudden emergence of her artistic ability, never examined what she was drawing with such unnatural precision. Interviews conducted by Reverend Blackwood with a handful of children who had occasionally played with Eleanor revealed statements that took on new and terrible significance. Sarah Pennington, aged 11, recalled Eleanor saying in late February, "I have to draw what I see so it can happen. If I don't draw it properly, I don't know what occurs instead." Another child, Michael Brennan, remembered Eleanor explaining that the pictures come first, and then the world catches up to match them, like tracing over something already finished. These statements raised the question that would haunt every subsequent investigation and analysis of the case. Was Eleanor Hartwell predicting future events through some unexplained precognitive ability? Or was she somehow causing these events through the act of rendering them? Her drawings not prophecies, but rather blueprints that reality felt compelled to follow. The distinction carried profound implications, transforming Eleanor from tragic victim of supernatural foresight into something far more disturbing. A child whose artistic documentation of her own death might constitute not prediction, but rather self-orchestrated fate, drawn into existence by her own impossibly skilled hand. The Eleanor Hartwell case divided Ashworth and the broader Lancashire community into camps of belief and disbelief, fear and fascination, each faction struggling to impose interpretive framework upon events that resisted rational categorization. Reverend Thomas Blackwood, whose personal transformation from skeptic to believer had been documented in his own journals, advanced the theory that Eleanor had been granted prophetic visions by divine providence, a gift similar to those described in biblical accounts of seers and prophets, though he struggled to explain why such a gift would culminate in the child's own death. Other clergy, including Reverend Samuel Morton from the neighboring parish of Haywood, suggested darker possibilities, that Eleanor had been possessed by demonic forces, that her drawings represented not foresight, but rather the influence of Satan, working through a child's innocent hand to mock God's creation and the natural order of time itself. Dr. Samuel Wickham, approaching the case from medical rather than theological perspective, proposed in a paper submitted to the Lancet that Eleanor might have suffered from a rare form of hysteria combined with extraordinary artistic savant ability, that her drawings represented not genuine precognition, but rather coincidental accuracy, combined with shared delusion among witnesses predisposed to believe in supernatural explanation. The rationalist position, articulated most forcefully in editorials published by the Manchester Guardian, insisted that the case must represent either elaborate hoax perpetrated by the family for reasons of attention or financial gain, or alternatively, a series of remarkable coincidences misinterpreted by credulous villagers. Despite the mounting physical evidence that made both explanations increasingly untenable. In April of 1889, the Society for Psychical Research, founded just 7 years earlier in London to investigate paranormal claims through rigorous scientific methodology, dispatched investigators Edmund Gurney and Frederick Myers to Ashworth to conduct comprehensive examination of the Eleanor Hartwell case. Their investigation, which lasted 3 weeks, included analysis of all drawings using magnification and chemical testing to confirm paper and ink dating, interviews with every witness who had known Eleanor or testified at the inquest, examination of parish records and coroner's documentation, and attempts to identify any possibility of fraud or misrepresentation. Their published report, issued in June 1889 in the Society's proceedings, concluded that we find no evidence of deliberate deception, no indication of coaching or collaboration among witnesses, and no explanation within currently understood psychological or physical principles for the documented accuracy of the subject's drawings, or the precise correspondence between rendered images and subsequent events. The case ignited fierce debate within the emerging field of parapsychology regarding the distinction between precognition, the ability to perceive future events, and psychokinesis, the ability to influence physical reality through mental force, with the disturbing question of whether Eleanor had foreseen her death or somehow caused it through the act of drawing remaining unresolved. The medical establishment largely dismissed the case as mass hysteria or investigative incompetence, while spiritualist movements embraced Eleanor as evidence of abilities beyond materialist science, her tragedy becoming reference point in lectures and publications arguing for existence of supernatural phenomena. The case appeared in early parapsychological literature as documented instance of apparent precognitive ability in a child, cited in debates that would continue for decades regarding the nature of time, consciousness, and causality. William and Catherine Hartwell, destroyed by grief and overwhelmed by the attention their daughter's death had attracted, sold their cottage in June of 1889 and departed Ashworth for an undisclosed location, refusing all subsequent requests for interviews, their later lives and ultimate fates lost to historical record as they sought anonymity away from the village where their daughter had drawn her own impossible ending. The legacy of Eleanor Hartwell endures not as solved mystery, but as persistent challenge to our understanding of time, consciousness, and the boundaries of possible human experience. The complete documentation of her case, including the original drawings, coroner's photographs, witness testimonies, and Reverend Blackwood's journals, remains preserved in the Lancashire Historical Society archives in Preston, available to researchers who continue to seek explanation for events that occurred 136 years ago. In 2008, forensic analysis conducted by the University of Manchester's Department of Materials Science subjected Eleanor's final drawing to paper dating, ink composition analysis, and fiber examination, confirming beyond doubt that the materials originated from the 1880s, eliminating any possibility of modern fabrication or historical revisionism. When researchers created digital overlays comparing the coroner's preserved photographs of Eleanor's death scene against her drawing, the correspondence proved so exact that it could be measured in millimeters, an accuracy that defies coincidence or lucky guessing. Contemporary parapsychology researchers continue to cite the Eleanor Hartwell case in academic discussions of precognition, with her documented timeline of prediction to fulfillment, representing one of the most rigorously verified instances in the literature of anomalous cognition. The case raises theoretical implications that extend beyond paranormal investigation into fundamental questions about the nature of time itself. Whether the future exists in some form that certain individuals might perceive, whether consciousness operates outside linear temporal constraints, whether causality flows in only one direction or permits loops and paradoxes. The philosophical question that haunts every analysis remains unresolved. If Eleanor drew her death with such precision and then walked willingly to meet it, did she exercise choice or merely fulfill inevitability she had already witnessed? The stone steps where Eleanor Hartwell died remain at St. Mary's Church in Ashworth. Though the building itself serves now as community center rather than house of worship, the congregation having disbanded in 1967, a small brass plaque installed on the centenary of Eleanor's death in 1989 marks the location with simple inscription, Eleanor Hartwell, 1877 to 1889, who saw beyond. Visitors to the site report sensations of unease, a heaviness in the air around the steps, and some claim to have glimpsed, in peripheral vision at times near 3 o'clock on March afternoons, the figure of a girl in Victorian dress standing at the upper landing, looking down at the base of the stairs where her body would be found. The central mystery persists across more than a century. Eleanor Hartwell knew exactly how and when she would die, documented that knowledge with impossible precision 3 days before the event, and then walked deliberately to fulfill what she had already rendered. The evidence remains, preserved and verified, waiting for an explanation that conventional science and rational philosophy have yet to provide. A question mark hanging over 136 years of human progress and understanding, asking whether we truly comprehend the nature of time, fate, and the terrible gift of seeing what has not yet come to pass.